Got it. Okay. So I'm going to just jump right into it. So when we talk about reparations, there are, really we're becoming more educated on reparations. When I first entered into the movement, really 2019, it was really based around a cash check, looking at the models of the Japanese community that received reparations for internment under the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, Holocaust survivors and descendants that received reparations. The conversation was really kind of rooted in a check. And one thing that I learned really quickly is that reparations is not a transaction. It is a process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people who were injured due to their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights by a government, corporation, institution, or individual. And so what we have mostly heard about is government reparations, the goal of HR 40, Civil Liberties Act, and so on. But it is not just the federal government that is responsible to repair these harms. It's also local and state governments, but also institutions like the church, like colleges and universities, industries, and so on. And so we'll get more into that. But that helped make the conversation more real, inclusive, and attainable, in showing how there were many responsible accomplices and many that could support the movement for reparations. Shoot. So if you go, we won't have time today, but I would love for you to look at our toolkit, which is on our website at firstrepair.org. We also have a discussion guide, which is very valuable. If you watch the documentary, The Big Payback, it's still available on the PBS app. It's also available on Amazon Prime, and it shows the process that Evanston went through to get to our 2019 passing legislation, and then later to get to that implementation that happened just last year. But there's a lot of information, including a timeline showing that it's not just 40 acres and a mule that most people default to. There have been many other efforts for reparations. Black folks have been fighting for our liberation, freedom, and repair since we were kidnapped from West Africa and brought here. So we like to make sure that we don't mislead the discussion to suggest that this is a novel concept, that in any way I'm innovative or anyone else is innovative. Me and you, we are building on the work of many that have come before us that have been fighting for racial justice and repair in the Black community. And there's a lot more information on our website. So jumping into the forms of reparations, I think, is where everyone sees their role. So it's not just cash, although cash is a popular form of reparations under compensation. It could also be under restitution. That's going to be tangible, dollars, grants, that form of reparations. But there are three other forms of reparations, which I have to tell you, when I go into communities all across the nation, Black communities are looking for a comprehensive response to reparations. The other three that aren't often talked about is satisfaction. And this is one area where we're doing okay. Of course, there's much room for improvement, but satisfaction is going to be truth-telling and truth-seeking, monuments, apologies, acknowledgments, holidays. Juneteenth passing as a federal holiday is a form of reparations. Insufficient by itself, but it is a form of reparations. Education, truth and education. These are forms of reparations that are usually the first best step to begin your process of reparations. And that could start in the form of a report, acknowledgement that acknowledged your harm, your congregation or your community's harm to the Black community, detailing it, whether it was programs or different forms of segregation, acknowledging that harm and acknowledging the impact of that harm. And then an apology, which comes with some type of an action plan for reparative justice. But also guarantee of non-repetition or cessation is probably one of the most important forms of reparations, because if we do achieve reparations in tangible forms and we do not address institutional harms, discriminating laws, policies, and programs, if we don't reform that, then we would, for example, give a monetary reparations into a community that has to go to a predatory lender and still have, unofficial redlining and property taxes that are overassessed and not having fair access to information and opportunity and education. And so another next step that is ideal for reparations is guarantees of non-repetition. And then rehabilitation is an area that many Black communities are recognizing now, the trauma that we have as just being Black in America, just waking up Black, the microaggressions that we experience in the workplace and in public, the police terror that we either experience or witness, and how that is traumatic and impacts our wellness. There is science around transgenerational epigenetics, which says that we have inherited harm. The harm is within our genes. And there's a report done by NCOBRA that shares the medical explanation as us inheriting harm and carrying it through our genes through the transatlantic slave trade. So trauma-informed care and other forms of healthcare and rehabilitation. We all saw how COVID disproportionately impacted or really crippled the Black community because of our pre-existing medical conditions. So I want to put that out there, as this doesn't have to default into how much money can we raise and how many checks can we get out. It's much more comprehensive and thoughtful than that. It should get to some form of tangible redress, but there is many, many opportunities for you to begin practicing repair right away. And so these are some of the institutions that we're looking at, again, not just governments, churches, denominations, corporations, industries, individuals, foundations. And I will give you the slide deck if you want to share it with folks that couldn't make it. Now, this is an example of 3 cities that are pursuing reparations and what their repair is rooted in. In Evanston, which is in the middle, we're looking at, and we're often recognized for being a slavery reparations or a redlining reparations. Neither are the case. We actually are looking at Evanston policy. So Evanston had anti-Black zoning laws that were enforced until fair housing was passed on a federal level in 1969. And so those damages are responsible for our current conditions, and that's what we're repairing. Amherst, Massachusetts, another small college town, much smaller than Evanston. They had racial covenants, housing covenants. And then Tulsa, Oklahoma, we all know and should know more about the race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that's what they're looking to repair. A very specific and hyper-local harm is being repaired, and not looking to repair the global institution of slavery or even federal slavery. But what have you done? What has your church done? What has your community done? And this is just an example of the historic red line map of Evanston, which is still our most concentrated Black community, our most concentrated disinvested community, the community that has air quality issues, no neighborhood school, no healthy foods in the neighborhood, and so on. This story is the same really all across America, certainly in Chicago, where I see a lot of you are from. This is an example of an income gap grid. These are some cities that we have worked in. This is an old map. We've now worked in about 50 localities across the nation, and our work has gone international as well, just coming from the United Nations recently. And so when you meet with your Black communities, one thing I should say is that the work really should be informed by the Black community, and engaging with the Black community is important so that you can hear what reparations means to the Black community. And this word cloud is just raw feedback from our initial meetings in Evanston, but it's the same everywhere we go. And again, you see so many more recommendations than cash. Access to home ownership or housing, affordable housing, genealogy access, access to college, financial literacy, business grants, historic landmarks. And so that's why I'm very excited that your congregation is going to be best utilizing your footprint for housing. And there could be a reparative model even in that. And I imagine there is. I don't know all the details. And here I want to show you a timeline. I'm going to show this just so that you can understand how much of a process it is, and you can set an expectation for yourself and learn to build on milestones over time. And so I called the question of reparations in February of 2019. I called the question by contacting our Equity Empowerment Commission to let them know that I was challenging them to begin a process of reparations, and I wanted their support and had to get their support in a vote and so on. But really, when I began my research on the history of reparations, I learned that Evanston passed a reparations resolution in 2002. It was led by Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste. He was the second ward alderman at the time. And he and many other local leaders returned from the World Conference Against Racism, which was in Durban. And they came back implementing reparations resolutions supporting HR 40. They also came back introducing slavery disclosure ordinances, which institutions and governments should acknowledge their vendors that have a history of slavery and hold them accountable in some way. And so we had a foundation to stand on. We also had an acknowledgement that we passed in June of 2019, that's 58 R19, and it was to end structural racism. It also acknowledged our history of anti-Blackness in Evanston. And so we went through a robust public process where we heard from residents, primarily Black residents, on what reparations means to us, what forms do we want to see. And from that information, we crafted our priorities, and we passed Resolution 126 R19 that established our reparations fund using the first $10 million of our cannabis sales tax. More later about how we've increased that fund already. It established the fund, established the committee, and it prioritized our forms of reparations, which are housing, economic development, and educational initiatives. We've started with housing first. So in 2022, our committee work began, and we had some important milestones. We passed African-American heritage sites that was led by Shorefront Legacy Center. Please learn more about North Shore Black History at Shorefront Legacy Center. It's located here in Evanston at Sherman United Methodist. And we were certified by the National African American Reparations Commission for meeting the standard of reparations by a 10-point plan. We established the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, which I'll talk more about, and a fund there. And then we began our application process. Applications were open. I don't think I haven't updated this slide, but since we've opened our applications, we have randomly selected our first recipients, and we have begun dispersing reparations. Disbursements is $25,000 direct benefits. Initially, it was exclusively used towards a home or a home purchase in any way that builds equity, but we have now received a legal memo that we can offer cash benefits. So we have the option to take a cash benefit. Very, very exciting. This is a huge milestone. Again, alone it's insufficient, but we have accomplished something, proven a concept that said was a political non-starter, could not happen, would create and incite a race war. And all it's done is bring our community together more so than we have ever been. So I'm very proud of my city. Now, this is important. These are the partners that you need to advance a reparations initiative. You need stakeholders. And in this conversation, we're talking about Black reparations, the harm to the Black community. You need Black community to inform your process. I use Evanston examples here because many communities have the same. If there is a local NAACP branch, that could be a great collaborator to engage Black stakeholders. You may have a very organized Black club. You may have affinity groups at your churches, but you need Black community to inform a process and give feedback. In our case, this is who we used. You'll need a legal team or legal professional, not so much as we do with government reparations, but you definitely want to make sure that you are in line with a viable approach towards reparations. We used a narrowly tailored legal framework so that we would withstand any types of legal challenges, which we have received, but you will need that. A recommendation to partner with you is the African American Redress Network. It's a collaboration between Howard Law School and Columbia University that is really incredible, and they provided us a lot of support. For institutional reparations, you don't need the government, but you do need to engage with reparations organizations. And so this is a great start. I'm providing some information, a little bit of background, some education, but it's very important that you have ongoing public education so that folks understand what reparations is. It is not a penalty to white people. It is not a attempt to take something away from another community. It is justice. And as we talk about that more, it becomes more palatable. And in your case, as a faith organization, it makes a lot of sense to, like our interfaith Evanston community has done, provide sort of doctrine, sermons. In the case of Beth Emmet Synagogue, they did white papers, but how reparations is in line with your spiritual context. And I don't know any faith community that isn't rooted in forgiveness, repair, redemption, justice, love, and so on. A local historian is going to be important. In our case, we use Shorefront and Evanston History Center. You may have a church historian or a clerk that can put together the history of your anti-Blackness so that you can understand what it is you are repairing. Financial institutions aren't as necessary in your case, but allies are everything. So as much as I emphasize Black leadership and Black informing, this work is not done without allies. And my God, am I grateful for our allies here in Evanston, which happens to be the interfaith community and other non-Black community members and organizations. This is not a Black matter. This is a community matter. This is a community initiative. And this should be all hands on deck. And so as you have interfaith community or other allied communities informing their networks, small groups, you will actually build the public support that you need to advance the commitment of reparations. One thing I love about the church is how it's already organized. It has the social infrastructure and, you know, a trusted leader. You're usually already working in small groups and so on. So it's very easy to begin to organize around reparations. You need a funding source. In Evanston, we started with cannabis. What I should have added is we've since added real estate transfer taxes as an additional revenue source with an additional $10 million commitment. And we're looking for more ways to fund it. A researcher is going to be important. There's so many great universities in Chicago. You shouldn't have a problem there. You may have a researcher right in your congregation. And you'll need various reports, impact studies, projected impact once reparations is achieved. You want to look at the loss to community, the plunder, and so on. So there's various reports that'll come up over your work. And then philanthropy. And so in our case, we have a municipal funded initiative funded by tax funds, but we also have our Evanston Community Foundation. There's a Chicago Community Trust and many foundations in Chicago that help fund the work. And so for a long time, until very recently, the reparations movement was a volunteer movement of Black leaders that were not resourced to do this work. And now it's not as provocative. It's not a political non-starter anymore as it was, 6 years ago. It's a real conversation, and it usually takes resources to do the work properly. In addition to that, the interfaith community, I have to share, I'm so proud of, raise an additional $1 million to be a companion to what's happening at a municipal level. And they have given their contributions, and their future contributions will go to the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston, which is an independent Black body that will determine what happens with reparations. And then lastly, we're here today learning about what local reparations is. And so I wanted to breeze through this. The Big Payback is a documentary I highly recommend you watch. It's very well done. And I'll actually stop sharing my screen now. But I wanted to breeze through that so I could, one, leave time for questions, and then two, just share how I have seen the interfaith community really cement the work and broaden the conversation and legitimize it even more so than it had been when we passed our initial legislation. And so our interfaith community has put together a collective, like a proclamation. It's like a pledge to Black repair. And you can learn more about this. There's been media on it. I can find their toolkit and share it with you. That's the first thing that they did. They organized around that. They had a reparations town hall where they invited myself, but also our Congress people that have fighting for reparations at a federal level. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee attended and participated, as well as Congresswoman Jan Jakowski and other reparation practitioners, so that everyone was educated. And then on Juneteenth of last year, they initiated a campaign to raise money. And on Martin Luther King Day of this year, they made the announcement of having raised around $1 million as an initial contribution to reparations, while they do so many other things, which includes participating in our annual symposium, which I hope you all will attend. It's in Evanston on November 30th through December 2nd. And we will have a special track for faith leaders, clergy and lay leaders as well. And we'll have national faith leaders as well as some local reparation practitioners that will lead that case. I'm sure you all know that the World Conference of Churches has sent a letter to President Biden demanding an executive order for reparations. There are multiple denominations, both in the Catholic Church, Protestant Church, the Jewish faith, that have signed commitments of reparations for the entire denomination. I was part of a delegation that actually went to the Vatican several months ago to deliver a presentment for reparations to the Catholic Church. So there is a lot of activity and conversation around reparations and the faith community generally. I want to pause there. And is that about time or? Okay, perfect. I want to pause there and take any questions, and then I could follow up with a few last thoughts.
Yeah, if people have questions, why don't you go ahead, and if you're not on screen, put your hand up. If you are on screen, put your hand up, and then I can call on you in case we have some overlap here. And maybe I'll just get us started, Robin, if I can. I was really both kind of intrigued, inspired, and even empowered when you talked about the fact that it's not a Black issue, it's not a white issue, it's a community issue. And you said this has really brought our community together. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, what are some of the things that help to make that happen, and what does that then look like when you can say to this process and experience, we've come together? What is that looking like?
Well, it looks like everyone being honest with themselves and starting with this very uncomfortable work. And I was fortunate enough to be in a community of white folks that led with, I might misspeak, I might, it's my heart is right and I want to get it right. I want to work together and I want it the same. And so starting with a baseline understanding of the work can be uncomfortable. There's going to be guilt. shame, anger, pain, disappointment that comes along the road of reparations, but trusting that we're working together towards a goal of repair has made all the difference. And I'll say that in us working together, I have, a bunch of new besties that are like senior citizen, old white men, and we work together and understand that our culture is very different. There's disconnects. And that's the power that we have in our relationship in growing. And so the interfaith community has been great about that. One thing they did that I loved was there was one of the churches that there was a Black church. Second Baptist was birthed out of a predominantly white church here. And they, through their history, understood that Second Baptist was birthed because of discriminating practices. And they have given 50% of their assets to the Black church that came out of this church. There's also an interfaith organization that is predominantly white, and then there is a Black faith organization that is they've not worked together. And so through this process of reparations, they've been working together now, and we've been fellowshipping together, inviting other churches to come where that hadn't happened before. And it's been very, very beautiful. One thing that I do is I've even changed my language. Like, how do you support Black reparations? I get that question all the time. Like, what does it mean to be a friend? Like, be a friend to me. How would you feel if it were your family or friend who was being discriminated against? So I've just changed my language, even in, calling my collaborators friends and getting to know them personally and understanding that it's uncomfortable, but we're all working towards a common goal. And so it's created some really interesting new friendships, basically, in Evanston.
Great. Thank you. And I also want to welcome both Chris and Ariel to the call tonight. If you're comfortable and would like to just say a quick word of introduction, that would be great. And then we can proceed to if other folks have comments or questions that they'd like to pose to the group.
Sure, yeah. I am Ariel Frost. I use they, them pronouns. I am the music assistant at Holy Trinity, and was also previously on the LLP task force and part of the church council at Holy Trinity. So I'm excited to see this next iteration of where we go with our anti-racism work, including reparations.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to say a quick word of introduction? Okay, maybe we'll jump in a little bit later. Questions or thoughts, or what's stirring from you from this conversation so far?
Hi, I'm Anna. I joined on my phone. I hope you can hear me okay. Sorry for the tech. Thank you, Ms. Simmons, for that really wonderful presentation. And I'm one of the Holy Trinity members as well. And so we don't have a building that we're selling or doing housing like our partners in Lakeview Lutheran are. But we have an endowment, and what we started to do is find a researcher, like you were saying, to help us learn more about our presence in Wrigleyville and before, and how our church was able to build and acquire land. I think one of the struggles for us is been, as a predominantly white church, is to how to organically build a relationship with Black stakeholders, community members, that's not like, hey, we want to do this and we need a partner, and kind of in a you kind of way. I don't know if I'm being very articulate, but we're trying to figure that out, because it's not just about writing a check, as you put, but building relationships. And if you have any thoughts about that.
Absolutely. I would say, I understand you're a predominantly white church, but do you have any Black membership?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. And Ariel's on the call
Oh,
right now.
perfect,
Ariel
perfect.
is one of our members, but yes, we do. And we have been having one-on-one conversations with with folks who are identify as Black, brown, minoritized, and hearing a few of their thoughts, which are disparate. You know, obviously, it's not like there's one opinion. But
Absolutely. That's one thing we should have talked about. There's not one opinion in the Black community. It's necessary that you do have someone Black sort of informing a process and thinking about your path forward. I do think that partnering with either a Black congregation or a Black community organization, like I said, it could be a Black club, it could be some other organization, but that will be necessary. And I do think a first step would be getting education for your congregation. And I would say that's one of the first things that the predominantly white congregations did here. And you can have academics, practitioners, whomever come in and at least get a baseline education on reparations so that you can go in the right heart and spirit, understand all the sensitivities around the conversation, and then come up with a plan after that. But that would be a recommended first step. But you will, it's mandatory. One of the first practices of reparations is that it's Black led and informed, that you find some Black members of your congregation and really more than one to that point. Some Black folks don't want reparations. The pain is too hard. There's no way to calculate the debt. It's easier to move on without it. Some want nothing but cash. Others want a full portfolio of reparations. If you asked us all, we're all going to give you a different explanation, but you do have to come to a consensus, and that's where the hard work comes in.
Robin, there's a question that Ariel poses in the chat. I don't know if
Can you
Ariel...
read it to me? I've kind of messed up my screen. Thank you.
Okay, I'm wondering how to get around the idea that Black people can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And then an explanation that she is Ariel came. They came a little bit late because having a conversation with a family member.
So the question is, Black people pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. How do we get past that?
Yeah.
Well, you can see that we are at a disadvantage, that Black people have no shortage. We have no shortage of work ethic. You know, we built the nation, right? For stolen labor. We have no shortage of ambition and so on. It's the policies that keep us back. If we didn't have these discriminating policies and 400 years of oppression, then we would be able to compete with our peers, but we can't. And so that's why reparations, that's why policy reform, and we have to get past that question, that argument about pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. There are some Black community members that feel, well, I have arrived, or I have this certain amount of wealth or comfort and I've done it, everybody else can do it. But you can look at the broad racial gaps to see that a community cannot do it without justice and policy reform and repair.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
if there's time, I have one other question, and that is that our church is in Wrigleyville on Addison and Racine, and we had earlier locations. One was destroyed in the Chicago fire, and we're trying now to trace that history of how we ended up where we are. But we've been thinking a lot about land as well, and how land was cleared of Indigenous persons. And so we've been thinking about reparations in that direction as well. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you get into your work in determining the forms of reparations, I haven't been a part of one initiative that land or some type of land ownership doesn't come up as a form. But it is important that you don't go prescribing what repair will be without any engagement from community, because that becomes problematic, and you could have a community that is more concerned about education or something else. And know that land and home ownership, those come up in every conversation, but you can't go leading and informing. You have to really be part of a process that comes to the conclusion of the forms of reparations. One other thing I didn't mention that empowered me to call the question on reparations was how it is a community benefit. And it shouldn't take that to justify the case of reparations, but there was a report done in 2019 or 18. It was a cost of segregation report done by the Metropolitan Planning Council. And it used Chicago as an example on if they address the racial segregation, how it would be such a value add to the entire city, increasing, maybe it was $2 billion to the GDP, and increasing education and household income in Black communities by $1 million, and reducing crime. So looking at reparations as a community benefit is another approach when you are going through your education on how it uplifts the entire community.
You know, one of the things that I'm really curious about as we're thinking about this, and I think there are ways that we can work institutionally as organizations unto ourselves in our own communities, engaging folks who live in our neighborhood, for example. We are also, Lakeview is one of 4 congregations called the Lakeview Lutheran Parish, that encompasses a pretty good part of the Lakeview community in Chicago. And then you have been working at a citywide and now even national and international level. And just wondering how you're thinking about kind of maybe the different approaches, what's maybe critical at this point. Maybe are there first steps and then kind of getting to kind of policy questions and kind of broader scope, or how are you thinking about kind of that tension between local direct action and more policy action?
Well, I think with your coalition, you can do the education, the public education piece together, because there are fundamental reparation practices, the history of reparation, new precedents now, learnings. But then when you get into, you have different congregations here, different communities. You'll have to get into that research and policy work very hyper locally, but it's very important that you are a part of a coalition. There are more and more that are convening, and that way you can learn and share. We actually have a monthly reparation strategy call that's on Zoom, and just hearing other initiatives, seeing the barriers or seeing their achievements can inspire you. So I would recommend that you use this coalition as a community to provide reparations education. And then you individually will need to get these harm reports and research so that you understand what the harm is. Once you understand what the harm is, you can then begin to determine eligibility, which is something we haven't even talked about. Who are you serving? Who are you repairing? What community is it? Is it a neighborhood that's in proximity to your church? Is it a Black descendants of your congregation that had some type of a harm? That has to be determined. And those things will determine the eligibility as well as the form of repair. So in the question about land, if the repair if the harm was not necessarily rooted in some sort of land acquisition or something related to that, then you may not be looking at that as a form of repair. So really, education in the coalition, and then individual harm reports for each congregation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Josh,
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate what you had to share. I'm one of the things that we've been trying to pursue is reflecting on how worship practice could change. And I know I asked this question in our event last week, so I apologize for you. I am curious if, obviously you're working in different institutional contexts, if there were practices like challenges that you face because of the structure of the institution and or transformations that you feel like you've been able to bring about or that have happened like institutionally around like the Evanston City Council and how it works, and if you sort of see any analogies that might be helpful to us. I'm sorry, that's kind of inarticulate, but
well, I'll say one thing that I did do while I was on city council is requested a closed session training on sort of our racial segregation locally and nationally so that we had a safe space to learn together. And passing reparations is pretty radical, and being the first in the nation to do it, you get a lot of attention. And I think that because it passed with such support, it passed with an 8-1 vote, we had a council that was committed to racial redress. And if there was any learnings, it was more of implementation and rolling out the program, and staff learning that a reparative model had to be implemented in every step of this process, even, for example, the application processes. So normally in government applications, there's a lot of process racism, there's digital divides, there's Black community doesn't really trust the government for valid reasons and so on. And so we had to create new systems and forms of engagement with the Black community. So it felt very different than any other practice so that they could trust the process and also have access to even apply. And so we partnered with the Evanston City Library and one of our community centers to be a designated place where you could go and get qualified and so on. But I would say that when you begin to implement reparations, you have to practice a reparative model in every area. That's even down to hiring vendors. Say you have an event and you need to hire vendors. You need to really be thinking about who are you spending your dollars with and who is, greeting folks at the church and so on. You have to start to be conscious about every step.
thank you. That's really, yeah, thanks. That brought my mind in a lot of directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I can't see the chat, but if there are no other questions, we do have and you can sign up on our website. It's firstrepair.org. Our strategy sessions are open strategy sessions, and we do break out regionally monthly as well. So you will be a part of the Midwest region, which is actually the largest region. And we have an expert presenter every month. Actually, this month or last month, we had interfaith leader, clergy, Reverend Dr. Michael Neighbors was the presenter. But we've had attorneys come and present on legal frameworks, how to engage ally community, cultural currency. We recently had a Grammy artist rhyme fest. So it's really rich. And then you also hear reporting from each region on the milestones and the barriers that's happening in the movement. And some of the participants are churches. They're not all municipalities. Most of them are, but there are some descendant communities and some churches that are advancing reparations. And just hearing from them, I think, will inspire you and at least give you a community that you can engage with and maybe get some questions answered that you didn't know that you had and inspire you to move forward.
thank you. Let's see if there are any additional comments or thoughts at this point or questions.
I just asked a quick question. If I was looking at the Shorefront Legacy Center website, and is there a relatively similar organization for City of Chicago to
So
help
I don't know. So I would say maybe DuSable Museum, but I do want to put this out there. The Folded Map Project, Tanika Johnson is the artist activist behind that. You may want to, I would recommend that you have a folded map presentation. She has a few different forms. There's a documentary, she does a workshop. There's even a tour. I would recommend that you have this tour of Chicago. We do a tour of Evanston, and I would love to make the recommendation to Tanika. She actually is one of our advisors and a board member if you have any interest in that.
Yeah, that would be great. Should we just follow up with you through the First Repair website or mention that?
Yep, or whoever the organizer was, I can just send it to, if you could share it with the group, or you could reach me directly at robin@firstrepair.org, and I'll make the introduction.
Somebody ought to tell him.
Excuse me?
So on our call today, we have Nanette, our friend Nanette, and she is actually one of the first folded map participants.
Oh, awesome. I think the work is really is just so fascinating, and I saw it and I reached out to her, like it was like a, you know, kind of like a fangirl situation to Tanika, and asked if we could partner, and we've since partnered. So I'm glad, Nanette, you were able to do that.
Thank you so much. It was interesting.
There is a question in the chat about whether First Repair is hiring.
Oh, we actually are hiring. So we're currently hiring for 2 positions. One is a content specialist, and the other is a development coordinator. There's a coordinator position. And we do require some in-person hours in Evanston, and there is some travel involved, and it's very rewarding work and very fair compensation. You can go to our LinkedIn page and apply there.
I just wonder, Robin, in this process, if you might kind of give us some insights about what were maybe the core challenges along the way, and maybe, you know, what were the surprisingly amazing things that happened for you and others during this process?
Sure. So the core challenges will be how eligibility and forms of reparations, where with limited resources, how do you pare down, you know, 400 years of harm to one thing that we can actually do. And so we got there, and a lot of opinions about that. And I will say that that was the biggest challenge. Also, being that it was a municipal initiative and not private, just it withholding sort of any type of legal challenge. So having a strong case for reparations, those were the 2 biggest challenges. But in terms of getting support around reparations, it wasn't a challenge in Evanston. We had unanimous support for reparations. We had very little disagreement about our path forward, but that wasn't a challenge. We're a progressive city. We have a history of kind of doing some things first. But some of the beautiful outcomes has been the community unity around the reparations movement, as well as the recipients of reparations, hearing from them. I think that is the most powerful outcome, to hear from a recipient of reparations. In the case of the process of our disbursements, elders or seniors have received reparations first. So all the recipients have been about 70 or older. And to hear them tell you 3 years ago that it'll never pass, or 4 years, it'll never pass. Thank you, baby girl, for trying. It'll never pass. And then for it to pass, and to say, you know what, if nothing else happens, we've been acknowledged, and I don't believe anything will happen, but we've been acknowledged and we feel more hope. And then for them to actually receive a check for $25,000, an apology from the city of Evanston, a plaque, a dinner with a libation, an interfaith prayer, hearing directly from our mayor and other leaders. To experience that is, I still don't have the words for it. We just had our last recipient dinner a week ago tomorrow. And the excitement and joy in that room with their families, we had 34 at this one. We invite their families and they come, and their families are so excited and hopeful. They believe that the life circumstances for their children and grandchildren are going to be very different. They feel heard for the first time in community. They feel a sense of place. Black residents now are stepping up more so than ever to lead, to share their voice, to express ownership in community matters. We passed the city, not the city, but the school board, after many years of attempting to return a school to the Black neighborhood, failed referendums and everything. They have passed that. We have a school returning to the Black neighborhood. So those are some of the wins. And then the movement. I was just thinking about my neighbors, like the village that I grew up in. I wasn't thinking about a national movement or any sort of international recognition or being a part of a global Black community that's fighting for reparations and speaking at the United Nations. And none of that was even on the radar. So to see that our small city sparked a inspiration for a movement is a bonus that we weren't thinking about. And we're very proud. It's a lot of responsibility also being the first. Everyone has an opinion, and but to be a part of the organizing and mobilizing around a nation now that only had one in Evanston in 2019, now has about 112 legislative reparations initiatives. Had last Congress closed with 217 co-sponsors and yes votes in the House for HR 40, where we never had more than 65 co-sponsors for HR 40. We have a Senate companion bill now. We have several hundred ally organizations that have signed on to support reparations. We have more institutions, Harvard and other colleges and universities. So these are some of the outcomes that weren't on our mind in Evanston, but have been very special and have created a lot of hope. One other thing that I should add is the movement has been a resource now. So we can professionalize our efforts, we can spread the word, we can organize, we can get the message out into media and other places to take away some of the controversy around reparations and make it more of a justice initiative and not so provocative.
But it sounds to me like it was really the local work and the local organizing, because HR 40 has been kind of proposed since I think the 70s or 80s, right?
That's right. It was introduced in '89 by Rep. John Conyers. It's languished in Congress since. It did actually have a milestone pass out of judiciary in 21, but never a floor vote, even having the support that it needed. And initially there was hope that President Biden would sign an executive order, but he since has gone on record to say that he'll let Congress deal with it. We know it won't pass the Senate. So the only path forward is a what do you call it? Executive order. And we're ways away from that. But local to national is how most monumental transformational policy happens. If you think about school desegregation, marriage equality, ban the box, even cannabis now is a federal conversation where it was state before. It usually happens local to national, and we're looking at reparations the same. If you think about strong local leaders like Rosa Parks' action in not giving up her seat on the bus, and how that and many other actions around that sparked the civil rights movement and many of the civil rights that we have today from a strong local leader. And so we're not discouraged by what's happening or not happening nationally. We're committed to doing our local work and building on it, building momentum, and getting towards a federal response.
Awesome. That's truly inspiring.
Mhm.
And you got you have a lot that you've carried on your shoulders, but you've accomplished a lot by getting started.
And that's the thing, I think that so many get paralyzed in it's not enough. And what do you do? Well, you'll never do anything if you don't start somewhere. And if we didn't start with committing to reparations, we wouldn't get the first 10 million. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't be at an additional 10 million. There wouldn't be 112 cities doing this work. And so you just have to do it afraid and unsure and full of faith, and know that it's a step and a process, and just keep doing the next best thing. And people ask me all the time, how do you do it? I just woke up and did the next best thing every day. And I'm committed to doing that for the rest of my life. And I know that it's intergenerational work, that we can't repair this harm with any one transaction. So once I could take the pressure off of myself, and you do the same, that you're not going to fix it. It's not going to be, we fixed it. We've closed the racial wealth gap, or we have closed it. It is a process to get there. And so as long as you're committed to a complicated, protracted process, you'll continue to make progress. And that's really my best advice, is to begin, to begin. And with HR 40, there's so much debate about the forms. There's scholarship around it will be $12 trillion, and others say no, it's 14 trillion. And then folks want to debate lineage to people that were not descendants of people enslaved in America. And all this debate is happening. And the only question on the table right now is, can we establish a commission to begin discussing this and developing proposals? And so that's a big distraction, in my opinion, from getting this commission established, because the scholarship might be right. It could be 12 million. It could be 14 trillion. Maybe it is going to be lineage or not, but all that happens with the commission. And so a great first step is convening. I think I already heard that there's a reparations team at one of the congregations. That's a very appropriate first step. A next step is a education. Bring in a expert, someone, a scholar, it could be a practitioner, to come and give you a timeline. And I have some recommendations on who could do an excellent job. Riveting. Cam Howard is one. Nikichi Taifa is another. Cam Howard's right in Chicago on the South Side. He's been a national reparations leader for 20 years, past co-chair of NCOBRA. Reparations United is the name of his organization, reparationsunited.org. He can come in and give you a education. Then you'll need a harm report for your organization. Then you can begin to do the work on how do we repair this harm.
I wonder if one of the folks from Holy Trinity would be interested at this point in just kind of giving us a quick update on your progress and what some of the steps that you've taken so far.
I guess I can, or Anna, you can go ahead.
No, go for it, Josh. Go ahead.
I'm hearing in the language of the steps that you're describing, sorry, I just heard the phrase you used. You said harm report, or I think that's something that we're in the process of. We did a little bit of research ourselves, and we've reached out to hire somebody who can dig in a more professional way. And our thought is that we can move from there to find we have some dates that we're penciled in to share with the congregation, to open up some discussion about what's been found and what reflection we can do from there. I think Anna mentioned we're trying to reach out to different folks. We tried to start by reaching out to folks of color within the congregation. I think we want to reach out more directly to the church council. And I really appreciate what you just said about beginning, because I think I do get stuck in that, but this won't be enough. And so I hear you. And it's really inspiring to hear you speak about the steps that you took. Anna, I'm sorry, is there more you want to?
No, you've covered it really well. I just would add that, yes, we have 7 members on our congregational reparations team who all identify as white. And we don't want to obligate the Black and brown folks in our congregation to be on the reparations team, if people are welcome, but we also haven't wanted to impose on folks. But we have been having those one-on-one meetings, as we mentioned. And in trying to find a researcher to help us kind of learn more about our address and how it came to be and wealth accumulation, the Newberry Library gave us a list of independent researchers that we could contract with. And we contacted several and looked on their websites and such. All seemed to be white from what we can tell. And some have expertise in discrimination kinds of research. But to your point about at every point, think about this and who your vendors are, who you're contracting with. I really would love to connect with Tanika Lewis or Cam Howard or others who can help us do research that isn't just employing a white person to do this work with us too. So
I love your thinking on that. And if you just email me, I'll make the introductions to Cam Howard and to Tanika, and that'll be a great place to start. I just recently completed a fellowship at University of Chicago at the Institute of Politics, and they have some very committed academics there, Black academics there as well. And maybe I could make an introduction to find a researcher at U Chicago.
Whatever, we'll send an email, but thank you very much. This has been so really helpful. And we hadn't thought of phrasing it as a harm report, but I think that would be really great to do. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's interesting because, as congregations, organizations, institutions, we are so used to kind of putting our best stories forward, right? And this is really turning that on its head and saying, okay, we have to dig in here a little bit and not be afraid to say, okay, there's some steps along the way that we've either papered over, not covered, not addressed, ignored, silenced. Time to do some of that work. Sorry, Josh, you were going to say something.
Actually, I was going to say something.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Carrie.
Thank you so much for all of this. I've taken pages of notes since you've been talking. This really gives me, and I think all of us, because you've heard from a number of other folks from Holy Trinity, some really great ideas how to move forward. I love kind of the timeline that you set out of how to begin and what to go forward. And I really like the idea of bringing an expert to talk to, lay things out, lay out a timeline, and then moving steps towards that. And I really, really want to encourage us here, and I want to be part of it too, to join in the coalition that you're speaking about and to come to some of these strategy meetings and to listen to what's going on and learn from the things that are happening, because it will definitely inform what we're trying to do. We have made a start. We're right at the beginning, which is still a beginning, but we have a great deal to learn from this. And the more people we can get involved, particularly, again, being a mostly white congregation, hearing from people in the Black community, what their ideas and thoughts about it. Not that we need to be imposing upon folks to teach us, but we need some guidance, some thoughts. We'll never be able to figure it out trying to understand ourselves because we haven't lived it. And so that type of guidance, that type of thought, that type of expert help would really be great. And I hope that we will pursue all of those things. I think it would really help us move forward on this. So thank you again very much.
Of course, Carrie. You're absolutely right. And I did it, as a Black woman, I didn't know. And I sought out all the people that I mentioned to you. I asked them if they would give me a recommended reading list. If they were ever speaking, could I come? Was it public? And that's how my education came about. But to Josh, the point that you said about just starting and not knowing what to do next, it's so common. In fact, in the morning, 6 a.m., I hit the road for a road trip to Detroit, Michigan to have a closed session strategy session with their reparations task force. Has been appointed by the mayor that is just doesn't know what to do next. And it's very common because there's no blueprint. And you can look at Evanston or another community really as inspiration, but there's no one that can do this work for you. It's not cookie cutter. Your harm is going to be different. Therefore, your outcomes, your process, your eligibility is all going to be different. So there are some best practices, and I share that in the PowerPoint, but you have to move forward and you'll learn along the way. And I learned we learned that we did not recognize how important staff education was to the implementation. We learned that we didn't have the capacity to roll out reparations. That's why we only began dispersing last year or this year for an initiative that we actually passed in 2019. Now, there was a COVID delay and that sort of thing, but I expected us to be dispersing a year prior than we did, and we just didn't have the capacity to do it. We also didn't think about politics. We had so much support, no political opposition when we passed it. And then it became a national story and political opportunists got involved. And so then we had to deal with that. We had to deal with the narrative. We had to deal with conservative attacks from outside our community, even outside our region. We had lawsuits from Texas and DC from different conservative organizations that just weren't on our mind. We were thinking more who within Evanston won't support it. And we weren't thinking about partisan politics outside of our own community. So we've been learning, we didn't think about, once we decide what forms of reparations, will there be taxation issues? How do we overcome them? We don't want to give a cash check and then there's a tax benefit or penalty or a income adjustment that now strips away an important benefit like housing or Medicaid or link card or these types of things. And so I was committed to keeping moving forward and not stalling. Some have using these barriers to stall. In fact, in Evanston, when COVID hit, it was actually a recommendation from our city manager at the time. Well, let's pause on reparations because COVID. Well, let's actually do reparations because it's the Black community that's dying, that, you know, doesn't have access to jobs. Low wage jobs were the first to go. It's the Black community that's most housing insecure. And that, so let's do it because of COVID. So I say all that to say that something will get in your way and you power through it. That's it.
I'm also really intrigued by what it seems to be that you're arguing for a specificity of response, right? As opposed to, okay, we've done our homework, we've looked at, the harm in the community. It feels like, there's a general response that we can make here, but it sounds to me like you're really arguing for, you got to be pretty specific in ways that are specifically redress the harm that was done. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And so that's always going to be my recommendation when it's a legislative response, because the narrowly tailored legal framework is the most viable. Now, in your church as a congregation, I imagine you make your own rules. I don't imagine you have that level of oversight or governance. But in terms of how broad the harm is, some harm is not the responsibility of your church. Some harm is actually City of Chicago harm. It could be federal harm. It could be institutional harm. So if you get to your harm report, then you have more of a justified case of repair versus you're one church trying to solve for all of the anti-Blackness that's happened over 400 years. How will you ever figure that out? But if you do your part as an institution and repair the harm that you've done, you can inspire and hold accountable the next institution to do the same and the next to do the same. You don't have the capacity as a church to repair your Black community, just financially. So looking at it as a collective effort where we're building on each other's initiatives and, local to national, more institutions, collaborations, and coalitions is a more attainable path forward.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. But what it also does is it holds the others accountable. So I imagine when you craft, like we have a ancestor acknowledgement, which I'll get to you, and we read it at the beginning of all of our meetings, and it frames why we're doing this work. And it also calls out other institutional accomplices. So it's not just the responsibility of Evanston, it's the responsibility of this nation and so on. And I'm going to take a minute to see if I could find it on my phone, and I'll read it just so that you understand how we frame and set the stage for all of our meetings and make sure that we stay focused on our goals. Okay, I'll read it now. Is now okay?
Yep.
So we start our meetings with this acknowledgement. It's in a way modeled after the indigenous land acknowledgements. With great humility and deep gratitude, we honor the strength, endurance, and sacrifice of our Black ancestors. We honor those enslaved African people whose forced labor was exploited for generations to help establish the economy of our region and the United States. We honor those Black ancestors who persevered despite the discriminatory laws and practices that created a racial caste system, legitimized anti-Black racism, and continued to plague our community today. It is only by recognition and understanding of these errors begun during our nation's origins and continue today that we can hope to correct our path. We acknowledge this exploitation of not only minds and labor, but of our humanity. We grieve for those Black ancestors who, despite their contributions to the city's wealth and freedom, were never recognized, fairly compensated, nor allowed to fully realize their own sovereignty. Because of their work, we are here and will invest in the descendants of that legacy. And through this process, we work to repair some of the harms caused by the city of Evanston. We also hope our focused attempts at reparations will serve as an example to the United States government and prompt other institutional accomplices to begin the process of repair. Reparations Committee. So we open every meeting with that acknowledgement.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. I mean, I was really struck by, your words around grieving as well, because I feel like that's an important part of the process.
Definitely. Definitely.
I think that might also be a good way to kind of wrap up our conversation with you. Mm-hmm. Unless there are other thoughts. Ariel, thank you for your comment in the chat. That's great. If there are other comments or thoughts, I would invite, so that Robin, you can get some of your evening back, but I'd invite us to hang in there for another 6, 7, 8 minutes. And would just love to do a quick debrief evaluation next steps with folks, if that's good. If you have to go too, that's okay. But for those who can stay an extra 7, 8 minutes, that would be great. So Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The work you're doing.
Yes, thank you. And all the best to you. Please share with the community or your coalition the strategy session link, or you can just go to our website.
Thanks again, and
Thank
we'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thanks for being here tonight, everybody. I really appreciate it. It's a chunk of time on a late summer evening. So I appreciate that you're joining with us and engaging in this process, either kind of ongoing work that you're doing or just starting or just kind of curious and want to know more about it. So I appreciate all of that for you. And maybe we can just I don't want to spend more than 10 minutes for sure, or 7 or 8 or 10 minutes for sure, but what are folks thinking about after that hour and a half together? What are some of the things that that's on your mind based on what we just heard?
I think for me, the most pressing thing feels like identification of community partners. I mean, I know Holy Trinity has a couple of congregations, but especially as we think about any work that we may or may not want to proceed with the LLP, like we've talked about also engaging there with alder people and other members of the community in Lakeview, it seems like it would be wise for us to start looking at organizations with whom we can start to build relationships and sort of prepare for what we might intend to do later. So
Thanks.
that's what's most pressing for me.
Yeah, it's nice to know that for one, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that like there are some systems in place, and at the same time, no individual place is going to be the same. Harms are different, and you need to really look at the people in your community, and also that it's not up to us. We're not going to solve everything, right away, but and not being prescriptive and just having conversations and finding out, the harm report and finding out the people of color in that community, what do they want? And so it can be scary, but it's also, you're not doing it alone, and there are people that can help.
One of the things for me, whenever I'm in conversations like this, is that I think that LLP, and specifically just from what I know about Holy Trinity and Lakeview Lutheran Parish, Lakeview Lutheran Church, right, Lila, you, have sort of been like bumbling along this path for a while, without like calling it a specific thing. Like I feel like there are a number of relationships that we've already cultivated, so it doesn't feel like the beginning to me. And I think that's encouraging.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that, because we've been at it as Lakeview Lutheran Parish for 3 years, and sometimes we stumble on something and sometimes we back away from something, and this might be, as you're suggesting, this might be one of those good stumblings. Not really a stumbling, but something that kind of really brings our thinking and doing and acting and working together in a good way.
I thought it was good to hear sort of a lot of things put into language that I didn't have words for, like the harm report, like the different web of sort of community partners that she laid out. It's like there's not one blueprint, but there is the beginnings of a blueprint. And I appreciated her bringing it back to specificity, and localized communal responses. And the fact that she acknowledged this is vulnerable work, this is uncomfortable work, and there are going to be challenges at every step of the way in different forms.
Thank you, Raider. Are there any next steps, either kind of general things for us to think about or specific things that you would like to see happen or have access to that are on your mind that as Robin was talking, as the discussion was going, you were beginning to think this is something that we could do, or this is something that we could and should access?
I mean, for LVLC, I don't know what you guys thought, but I thought I came away with, we do need more education. We do, and I don't believe are at a point yet where we're ready. Okay, let's contract someone to do a harm report, right? Like from Robin's layout, I don't think a movie night here, a conversation here, and a couple of meetings is enough. It's like and it's not one thing starts, you have to do one whole step before the next step. But I do think we should look into Cam Howard, Tanika, was it Lewis? Tanika Johnson, Tanika Lewis, and have more varied forms of education in our congregation and parish.
I would just say, like, we could think about going in on some sessions together or something too, partnering as two churches. I think that's a great idea. Or Raider, doing your own piece for your own specific location would be, of course, great too. And at Holy Trinity, we've been working with a really helpful curriculum called Sacred Reckonings. You can go to sacredreckonings.com, and that's also been the way that we've been doing some education of ourselves. And they also have online Zoom trainings and things like that. But it's put together by people of faith from across the country, and especially some key leaders in Minnesota. But we've been able to meet with them a bit. But I'm actually off my computer, so just Google sacredreckonings.com, or maybe Josh or Carrie could put it in the chat. But
are you wanting me to share the curriculum book, or just a link to the?
Yeah, just a link to the site. The curriculum book is on the site.
Oh,
it's
okay.
on the.
Oh, sure. Give me a second.
Time for maybe a couple of more comments. If people want to weigh in on this at this point. Thank you, Josh. Okay, if not, thank you all so much again. This is from my vantage point, this is a really good turnout, right? And I think it's indicative of people that are on the journey and want to be on the journey and want to go deep. Part of what I heard from Robin tonight is that this is work, and this is not just let's get out our checkbooks. But I appreciate that there's so many here tonight that are interested in this and want to take this up. It's work that's from the white community. It's work that's long overdue, and there's work that we can and I think should be doing. We're not going to change the world. We're not going to redress every wrong, but as Robin suggested, there's important work that we can and should be doing. That's both education and taking action that redresses some of the harms that we've been part of. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch again. And blessings to you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.